There is much about me I would not have him know.
So you value your privacy more than your son, eh?
I'm going to cut off your head now.
Fair enough.
One of my favourite Norse gods to appear in a new God of War, without a shadow of a doubt, is Mimir, and today we'll attempt to answer any questions that you may have about Mimir, how his role in the game compares to that of his role in Norse mythology itself. As always with these videos, there will most likely be spoilers, so if you do not want to have the story spoiled, I urge you to please click away now. We're first introduced to Mimir when he is being questioned by Balder and the sons of Thor, Modi and Magni, as to the whereabouts of Kratos and Atreus. Unwilling to help the trio, he insists that they leave, and it's right after this that he first encounters Kratos and Atreus. When they offer to free him from the tree that he has been trapped in, he tells them that there is a spell placed by Odin that will not allow his body to leave. In order to help Atreus and Kratos on their journey, they would have to cut off his head and take it to the witch in the woods where it would be resurrected. When they do eventually manage to revive his head, he then accompanies them to Jotunheim, acting as somewhat of a guide, offering them advice and useful pieces of information along the way. He does also provide some much needed comic relief to contrast the overall serious tone of Kratos. It's during the first encounter that we witness between Balder and Mimir that Balder describes him as being the smartest man alive, to which he replies that he's smarter than all the dead ones too, and this concept of Mimir being extremely clever is definitely one that manifests itself within Norse mythology. Mimir was thought to roughly translate to mean the Rememberer, and he was seen as being exceptionally wise. When the gods were in need of counsel, they would visit Mimir. There are only a handful of surviving accounts where Mimir's physical appearance is described, which makes it very difficult for us to tell if he was either an Aesir god or one of the Jotnar. The relationship between Mimir and Odin in the game resembles that of Norse mythology, with a few slight changes. We know that Mimir did serve Odin and the Aesir as an advisor, but he was never particularly fond of the Aesir. In order to keep the peace, he advised Odin to marry Freyja to bring the Vanir and Aesir tribes together. Throughout the game he does make it very clear that he harbours a great deal of resentment for Odin and Thor in particular. Having been tortured every day for 100 years by Odin, it's understandable that Mimir was more than willing to be decapitated by Kratos if it meant he could escape the confines of his tree. The concept of Mimir being beheaded and then later having his head revived was actually taken directly from Norse mythology, as during the war between the Vanir and Aesir, Mimir was actually beheaded by the Vanir. Upon seeing the severed head of his most valued advisor, Odin would then embalm the head with a mixture of spices, incantations and songs that would all help preserve Mimir's head. In times of dire need, Odin would then consult with the head, as it was still able to provide incomparable advice. Throughout Norse mythology, Mimir was regarded as the chief force behind the wisdom of past tradition, and there was no other being that possessed a level of knowledge that could even rival Mimir. Perhaps the most well-known story that Mimir features in is the story of why Odin only has one eye. Located deep beneath the roots of the wild tree Yggdrasil lies Mimisbrinir, the Old Norse for Mimir's well, sometimes also referred to as the Well of Erd. It was believed that a vast source of Mimir's knowledge came from drinking the water located in his well, and Odin, being on a quest for knowledge, willing to do anything to understand the meaning of life and the cosmos, would eventually journey to Mimir's well. After a long and tiresome journey, Odin eventually arrived, asking Mimir if he could take a drink from his well. As the Guardian, Mimir declined, unless Odin was willing to sacrifice something of equal worth. That sacrifice was indeed his eye. Valuing knowledge above everything, after a small period of contemplation, Odin eventually gouged out his own eye and dropped it into the well. With the sacrifice now made, Mimir took his great horn and filled it with water, giving Odin a drink. Odin was filled with vast amounts of knowledge, and he was given the gift of sight, being able to see things that had not happened yet. It's also thought that the god Heimdall may have visited Mimir's well, and sacrificed an ear in return for his heightened sense of hearing. Mimir's gift of sight in the game is attributed to his eyes, which were magical jewels given to him by the giants that signify the gift of sight. There are no actual accounts of Mimir ever being tortured by Odin, but the Odin we hear about in God of War is far more angry, paranoid and controlling than the Odin we see in Norse mythology. Mimir gives us this extremely interesting figure. In both Norse mythology and God of War itself, you have this witty, sarcastic character who contrasts very well with the serious tone of Kratos, but also literally serves as a well of wisdom. As always, I'd love to hear from you guys. How much of Mimir's story did you actually know before God of War? Is he a character you're particularly fond of? And do you think we'll ever see him with a body in a future game? Let me know in the comments below.